Hello, hello. Good morning. Going to get into a quick word from the Qur'an, and then we are going to part 3 of First Kings, discussing wealth and wisdom. Alright, so let's go ahead and read our daily message and our introduction. Thank you all for sticking with me and helping me create this great content. I appreciate you. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Alright. Okay. Interesting. Very good. Okay, Surah 6, line 119. Oh. Let's see. Surah 6. Line 119. And I titled this Wealth and Wisdom just because that's what we're going to be talking about in 1 Kings. Or First Kings, but this is a journey to wealth and wisdom. This line here, let me go ahead and read it. It says, "Why should ye not eat of meat on which Allah's name hath explained to you in detail what is forbidden to you, except under compulsion of necessity? But many do mislead men by their appetites, unchecked by knowledge. Thy Lord knoweth best those who transgress." This is great because I've been wanting to discuss the nature of these, of certain restrictions, dietary restrictions, for some time. Let me just go ahead and write this out really quick, and then we will begin. Is forbidden to you. Okay, almost through. Knowledge. Thy Lord knoweth best those who transgress. Okay. Knoweth. Alright, so this is pretty cut and dry, and this is just explaining things that we should avoid that have to do with our health, because it's having to do with what we eat. So I'm just going to actually go ahead and edit this title to Wealth plus Wisdom equals Health. Okay? And beyond health, there are certain foods that God Himself has said we should stay away from. And we began to talk about those in the very beginning part of the New Testament. I always say that, the New Testament, the Old Testament. We began to discuss that, the very beginning part of the Old Testament, following the kosher laws, right? And I will say in the Qur'an and in the Islamic religion, they follow halal laws, which are similar, although there's some overlap. There's some things that the kosher will avoid and observe, versus halal does not necessarily avoid certain things. Okay? And people come in with I think it was like the letters to Paul, or the letters from Paul, the epistles of Paul, where it says, oh, God has claimed everything clean and good to eat. Most things are okay and good for us to eat, but there are still some things that we should restrain ourselves from and should avoid. And I've been lucky and healthy and happy enough to grow up in a household where nothing was off limits, but I did maintain good health, and I ate good quality and healthy food growing up. So it allowed me to forge my own path and discover what works best for me. In college, I experimented with just low carbohydrates and really into the fitness world, and maintaining a good appearance. That is what I was focused on, right? Physically looking strong and thin, more so. But I did experiment with that, and it served good because it did teach me fasting in a way, right? Fasting was a big part of that. To observe fasting, not so much for appearance and things like that anymore, but really to gain closeness with the Lord. So there is the component of fasting that I had, taught myself growing up with the ideal body image and things like that, and what should be maintained. So that was something that I found on my own. But reading through the Old Testament, we learned about the laws of kosher. So kosher is avoiding anything with pork. Same with halal, okay? No pork. Kosher does also observe no shellfish, okay? That's shrimp, that's lobster, that's crab. Some people, like in my household, still observe, they will still eat, shellfish. Ian loves lobster and things like that. So it's something that I observe, but he does not. But he sticks with the no pork, and he introduced me to no pork. Oftentimes he will avoid red meat as well, like beef, when possible, right? But it's not a steadfast rule, okay? So yes, we have the kosher, we have the halal. There are other things in halal with just the quality of the meat, right? How it is butchered, right? How it is raised more or less, but more so how it is butchered. Same with kosher. And then the prayer put on the meat itself, and the blessing and the cleanliness of it as well. It's big laws both in halal and and kosher culture. Okay? So I guess for sure, right, we are to avoid pork. That is just something that's always been set in stone. There was nothing that necessarily said, go ahead and eat pork, it is fine. There are the letters of Paul, which we'll get to, where if we can discover, what it said about all foods being clean, that's what people held on to, and that's what people are misled by. It says here, many do mislead men by their appetites and unchecked knowledge. So, unchecked by knowledge. So if you have the knowledge of why we don't eat pork, maybe it's a little bit easier to abstain from. It is one of the most delicious meats, right? It's so tempting. Bacon is so tempting. Salami is so tempting. Ham is delicious, right? But if we understood why we do not eat it, maybe more of us would avoid it. And I would love to tell you the reason, right? I would love to tell you. I put it out in the ether, right? I've mentally spoken about why it's not good to eat pork. But as for right now, it is just too big of a concept and too woo-woo of a concept for me to speak about at this time. But very important that we abstain, because we want to keep our minds and our spirits clean, right? It's not considered clean. So just think of that. It's not considered clean. We want to keep ourselves pure. Shellfish is the next thing, because it's a ground, what is it, like a, what am I trying to say? It's a ground fish. What am I trying to say? It's a mollusk. Some things are mollusks. It degrades dead things, right? That's the reason why it's not clean. I forget why. I think scavenger. No, that's not what it is. But it will come to me eventually, and you guys know what I'm trying to say. It's one of those things that just gets uncleaned because of its nature of being on the ground and eating dead things and particles and certain bacteria. That's why it's unclean. Of course, fishing industry is very different today. Things are grown in fish farms and things like that. Things are cleaned thoroughly in the processing of them. So it's up to your discretion. But if you want to grow, your cleanliness of your spirit, and you want to grow closer with God, it is best to abstain completely, so we can, again, have that clear connection and that clear tie with the Lord. You'll be able to hear his voice much, much more clear, and it will just advance you spiritually. And that is not a lie. That is very truthful. It's very true. Very much of it is truth, okay? Let's see. Thy Lord knoweth best those who transgress. So when you do these things, eating what you're not supposed to eat, it is a transgression. So that's also something to remember. Like I said, I'm not going to mention, specifically why it's not good to engage in, swine, but it is a transgression, okay? And because you're clouding up your spirit system and your body, it makes it difficult to grow close to the Lord and have that open line of communication. So that's also a very important part. If you want to take it a step further, because I am all about pushing it to the absolute max, I'd like to know everything that I can do to improve myself and improve my relationship with God. If you want to push it to the absolute max, Nazarite, right? The Nazarite vow, I talked about this, I briefly mentioned it. Of course, abstaining from alcohol, which is also something in Islam, right? Abstaining from alcohol and anything from the vine, right? So really they're talking about grapes, so that means no vinegar. So you'd be surprised how many things contain vinegar, okay? If it's something like ketchup where it's not like an overwhelming taste of vinegar, it's not, you can't taste the vinegar, it's not really a huge concern. But you'd just be surprised how many things and how many flavors you can actually avoid by abstaining from vinegar or any fermented product. This is a tough one for me because fermented foods are everything to me. I really enjoy the taste of them. They're also very healthy for the gut. So it's actually hard to avoid. I love pickles, I love olives, I love pickled things, kimchi, what have you. Anything fermented is delicious, but you're supposed to abstain from the fermentation process altogether. If you want to, you can tweak it here and there because it's not perfectly clear on, I think for the most part people just take, okay, anything with grape, right? Nothing with grape, so that means no vinegar and such and such. Anything that's gone through this distilled process is still, vinegar goes through fermentation and then becomes distilled. So alcohol, anything like that, that's the final step. That's completely, you're taking the Nazarite vow. You are also not to cut your hair. You're supposed to let your hair grow long. That is, again, a vow between you and the Lord. And the only person that can allow you to omit the vow is, say you live with your parents, and they, are eating certain things or something like that. They can actually break your vow for the time, right? Another person that can break your vow is your husband or your wife, your spouse. So that's the other person that they can go ahead and say, oh, it's okay, and partake in this meal with me or join in this drink with me. That's the other person, and the Lord understands that because there is a social aspect to abstaining or not abstaining from certain things. So that's important. But first and foremost, remember, it should be hard. It shouldn't be something easy. Honestly, abstaining from pork, even though I love salami and things like that, it was hard at first, but it became easy over a time. Shellfish, I love shellfish as well, oysters, all of that stuff. It was hard at first, but then it became easy over time. So it's just something, you adapt to. The Nazarite vow is more and more difficult for me because like I said, I love everything spicy. Hot sauce has a lot of vinegar, okay? So it was very difficult. Abstaining from hot sauce was probably the toughest thing for me. Because I always said, if I could just survive off hot sauce. Like if that was the only thing I had, like I would be able to live just off of hot sauce. I remember telling that to myself for whatever bizarre reason, but I love it so much. That's why. But so saying goodbye to that, I think, is the most challenging thing. So that's what I'm experiencing right now. Again, it's a special vow for you and the Lord. This is between you and God. We talk about growing the connection and wanting to be closer, and this is how, you know, you can start to achieve it. Of course, through prayer and everything like that, but this is good for that mental communication. It's very, very important. Yeah, that's really all I have to say. I don't want to let this get too long. We are going to talk about some progress, some wealthy progress that's going on with King Solomon in his journey, his young journey. So without further ado, let me get to it so I don't cut into so much time here this morning. I have 3 midgets on my lap. Let me just show you, because all 3 of them are here. So sweet. Yes, I know I'm not wearing a skirt or anything like that, but I have my dress on. You weren't supposed to see that, actually. I had to show you the midgets, okay? Alright, well, I appreciate you guys for listening. Thank you for keeping an open mind and, you know, curious about everything, which is great. Yeah, wonderful. Let me go ahead and get into First Kings. I'll be back in a second.